Nice. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Crypto.com Live AMA. My name is Tommy from Crypto.com, and I will be your host for today. In this episode, we'll be joined by Austin Federa, Chief Strategy Officer at Solana Foundation. I'm sure most of the audience already knows about Solana. It is a decentralized proof-of-stake Layer 1 blockchain that uses Rust as the predominant programming language. As of today, Solana has over 1 billion in total value locked. And here to answer questions about Solana is Austin. Hey, Austin, welcome, and thanks for joining us for this AMA.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And can you please introduce yourself before we get into the questions for today?
Sure. So I've been involved in the Solana project for about 3 years at this point. I originally joined Solana Labs in January of 2021, worked on product and marketing and a bunch of stuff in the early days when it was just a 15 or so person team. About 9 months after the mainnet launched. And then I moved over to the foundation in June of 2022, and I run strategy for the organization. So that includes all sorts of work from internal work with different teams and stakeholders here to work with a lot of the ecosystem companies that are building on Solana, helping them figure out market opportunity. And really one of the big pieces I do is I work with a bunch of the different technical leads to figure out what are the real technologies that would be helpful for the Solana Foundation to help fund and develop to advance builders building on the network.
Right, perfect. So I'm sure that it has been like a roller coaster 1.5 year since 2022. So let's get into the questions. So let's start with the basics. Can you tell our audience more about Solana and how is it different from the other Layer 1 blockchains?
Yeah, so Solana is, as you said, a layer one proof of stake blockchain. But one of the main differentiators for Solana is that it runs in one global state and that its scale doesn't require sharding. It doesn't require layer twos or layer threes. Everything takes place in one global state. And the network has a capacity of somewhere around 50,000 transactions per second nowadays. And so what that means is it's a really fast, cheap blockchain that's really built as an execution layer. And so an execution layer is a very different value proposition than something like Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is meant to be a long-term store of value, but Solana is a smart contract network, and it's designed to be the fastest place for DeFi, for NFTs, for social applications built on blockchain. And it really achieves that by being built in a different programming language. So it runs on something called the Solana virtual machine as opposed to the EVM or the Ethereum virtual machine. And so that allows the network to sort of do things that other networks can't do. And one of those main things is really fast settlement, really low transaction fee, and really high transaction capacity.
Right. And because of this high performance features, right? There's a slang in Solana community known as abbreviated as OPOS. Can you tell us what OPOS stands for and what it means?
Yeah, so OPOS stands for only possible on Solana. And this was sort of a meme the community came up with where there are just types of applications that you can build on Solana that you can't build on other blockchains. The same way that there were things you could build on mobile phones when we got 4G and 5G technology that you just couldn't build on smartphones running on really slow internet connections. And so this is one of the real memes the community has kind of come up with, and a lot of the stuff is a really good highlight of what's different about the applications and the developers that build on Solana. So, there's dexes like Jupyter Aggregator, which are doing the same kind of advanced order matching and the same kind of advanced work that you'd expect from a centralized exchange, but it's built on just full DeFi rails on smart contracts. There's also things like decentralized physical infrastructure networks like Helium and Hivemapper and Render that are able to be built on Solana. And a lot of really interesting, fun things like compressed NFTs, which Drip House runs, are one of the big components too. This allows you to mint something like 100 million NFTs on the network for just several $1,000s. This is several orders of magnitude cheaper than you get on any other network. And so you get a really different kind of application built on Solana. It tends to be things that are more consumer focused, and that require lots of transactions that are very cheap. And so that reflects actually a lot more of the Web 2 applications that we interact with in our daily lives, as opposed to things that more resemble like online banking and things like that.
Right. And let's talk a bit more about decentralization, because
Yeah.
decentralization has always been the focus for all blockchain ecosystem. So how is Solana doing in terms of further decentralizing the network?
Yeah, so Solana today is about half the number of validators and nodes that Ethereum has. And so we think that's a pretty great metric for a network that is still, in the growing phase. One of the major decentralization initiatives that's underway is the creation of a second validator client for the Solana blockchain. So a validator client is the software package that if you say, I want to run a node, that's the thing you download and the thing you run a node on. Today, most blockchains have just one copy of that software. Bitcoin and Ethereum are the only ones that have multiple validator clients. So Solana adding a second validator client, it's really important for the long-term resiliency and decentralization of the network. Because if there's a problem with one of the validator clients, the other one can step in and keep the network up and running. You actually saw this happen earlier this year when, if you guys remember, there were some finality incidents with Ethereum earlier this year. The reason the network stayed up is because they had a really great diversity of validator clients running on the network. And so that was one of the really great things to see, is that this idea that multiple validator clients increase stability and decentralization of a network really was true. And we got to see this sort of battle tested earlier this year. And so Solana is the first network after Bitcoin and Ethereum to have a second validator client. And that actually started live on testnet earlier this year. And, it's expected to ship sometime in late 2024. So that's kind of one of those major steps forward for decentralization.
Right. I'm glad that you touched on Firedancer, because it's my next question.
Great.
So yeah, I was trying to ask you, like, what is a validated client? What does it do? And why is client diversity important to your network? But I think you cover most of it, right? But I also know that it seems to be there will be even more new clients coming out after Firedancer. So can you elaborate a bit more on that front? What are we expecting to see, and how much impact are we going to see, right, for the whole Solana network after we have more and more validated clients?
Yeah, so FireDancer is a ground up rebuild of the validator client architecture. And so it's built in a new programming language, it's built in C, and it's built by an independent team. This is a team of, high frequency engineers at Jump Crypto that have been building, really high performance systems in TradFi for a really long time. And so their wholesale rebuild of the Solana validator client is anywhere between 10 to 100 times faster than the current version of the validator client. But there's actually more validator clients in the works as well. There's a group called uh, the validator client is called SIG. It's built in the Zig programming language, and it's a read optimized client. And so this is really designed for RPC servers and data indexers and all the sort of tools and infrastructure you need to run a high performant blockchain. So they're building a third validator client. There's actually a fourth one as well that Jito runs. If you guys know Jito, they're sort of a mix of Lido and Flashbots for Solana. They build a MEV optimized client for the network, but they also run a large liquid staking network as well. And so, Firedancer was the first of those, and it's probably the most ambitious of those projects. But it's really great to see. At the end of the day, we may have 4 independent validator clients built on the Solana network by the end of 2025. So that's really awesome to see.
Yeah, that's all exciting to hear. But looking retrospectively, Solana has experienced several block production halts last year and earlier this year. I'm sure you guys have done a lot, right, to mitigate it and prevent it from happening again. But can you explain to our audience what are the root causes of those halts, and how can we expect going forward that we will be seeing a much more stronger, much more stable and resilient Solana blockchain?
Yeah, so Solana is built on a new architecture as opposed to the Ethereum architecture. And so, in 2021 and 2022, there were several times where block production actually stopped on the network because of a bug or because a system was overwhelmed by just a flood of traffic. And, the last 18 months for core engineers, both at Solana Labs, the Solana Foundation, and all these core teams that contribute from all around the network, was really focused on resiliency and reliability. And so some of that was just shoring up systems that hadn't been built robustly enough to handle the insane loads of traffic that people were excited about Solana for. And some of this was actually introducing 3 new technologies that helped resolve a lot of these stability issues. So one of them is Quick. It's a new networking standard that the network uses, which solves a lot of the spam problems on the network. The other was local fee markets, which is a new innovation that sort of is something that only Solana has, where instead of having one global fee market like you see on other chains where there's just one price for gas, Solana has local fee markets. And so each piece of state, each sort of account space on the network can have its own competitive fee auctions. And so this means even if there's a really high demand NFT mint, or there's an arbitrage event where someone hopes to get a lot of money, or there's a liquidation that everyone's trying to get in on, that will spike fees for just that one part of the network. So that'll have no effect on the ability of doing a stablecoin transfer or trading on a different DeFi marketplace or something like that. It sort of isolates the competition to one section of the network. And these three technologies, with stake-weighted QoS as the other one, have really been very successful. We've seen the market move by 25% in an hour or two, and the network remain up, remain performant, and have minimal congestion as we go through it. So, it's really just the culmination of, 2 years of really hard work focused on network performance and reliability. And, the network is now, the last time there's a performance issue was in February. So we're going on a pretty good streak at this point. So, fingers crossed.
Yeah, and I think it's a good thing that now it is battle tested, because it's just because there's so much transaction, so much activity on Solana, and that leads to us recognizing the things that we need to further improve on to prepare for the real actual mass adoption to come in. So
yeah, and we even see this with inscriptions, right? There's a number of networks now that are really struggling as inscriptions are becoming more popular because they weren't built assuming that type of traffic. Software engineering is hard, right? It's very hard to get it right the first time, and so this is just a part of building high performant blockchains. Is sometimes they run into hiccups.
Definitely. So let's move to talk a bit about a very hot narrative, which is modular blockchain. So it has been much discussed, especially among Ethereum and Cosmos ecosystems. So what is Solana's take on modularity versus being monolithic / all-in-one architectures?
Yeah, look, there's very interesting things that may be possible on monolithic blockchains and modular blockchains. Today, we really don't know. There's no modular blockchains that are actually operating in production. Celestia just launched, and they're just a DA layer, and so we're yet to sort of see that vision actually come to life in a real product. But one of the core theses of Solana is to keep everything in one global state. And this is a really different approach to scale from what you'd see in other networks that are scaling through either layer twos or through sharding or creating multiple copies of a blockchain that all sort of run at the same time. There's sort of a thing you can joke about, which is Solana actually has modular stuff deployed on top of it. Neon is a EVM emulation that lets you run Ethereum programs on top of Solana with full atomic composability. So that is the modular promise and dream. It's just running on top of Solana as opposed to running on top of something else. But the general thesis here is the fewer layers you need, the better the experience is going to be for the user. The fewer middlemen are in the middle taking fees and extracting value, and the more robust the system is overall. And so, I think if you look at a world where we have 1 billion users on blockchain and they're all using Solana, there will probably have to be some form of modularity and some form of layered systems. But, in our view, we're probably 100 times capacity away from needing to look at anything like that. And so the goal and the focus at, Solana Foundation, Solana Labs, and through a lot of the core contributors you see building on the network is to scale that base layer, to keep the layer one of Solana as performant as possible in one global state before you use anything else to try and scale. This is the whole point of FireDancer, to make the network 100 to 1,000 times faster over the next 3 years, without sacrificing composability, without sacrificing this one global state machine vision, which is what Anatoly and the other co-founders had when they originally set out to build this thing that is now Solana. So I think that there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in the modular world. It's a different thesis than Solana's thesis. That doesn't mean it's a better thesis. That doesn't mean it's a worse thesis. It just means it's different.
Yep, I agree. And I think it's just two different paths to the same goal and same destination.
Yeah, I will say, I think one of the challenges is in this industry is the hype is almost always ahead of the technology. And so there's a lot of excitement about modular blockchain. There's very little modular product at this point. And so this is not to say don't take modular seriously. There's interesting stuff happening there, but this is more to say use what is real. And so this is one of the main core values of developers on the Solana network is a deep focus on practicality and a deep focus on shipping things that people can use today.
Right. And talking about like the hype getting ahead of the tech, I have to mention about zero knowledge, because zero knowledge has been focused in almost all conferences I attended like this year and even like last year. And normally they come in like a form of like a CK focus L1 or like a CK rollup on the Ethereum ecosystem. However, it seems that not many people normally link CK and Solana together. So I'm curious, what would be the role of CK technology and what kind of CK development is there on Solana?
So ZK on most networks is actually used for two different things, and a lot of the times those get conflated as being the same thing. So most networks today are using zero knowledge proofs for a factor that's called succinctness. And so succinctness is basically a form of data compression. It means that you can have a very small proof that represents a large amount of data. And so most blockchains are actually using zero knowledge not for privacy, but for compression technology. On Solana, there's no need for compression technology. There's an abundance of transaction, there's an abundance of data availability. And so zero knowledge on Solana is really used for privacy. And so there's two main protocols that have been building zero knowledge technology for the last 18 months. They're both live on mainnet. One is called Light and one is called Elusive. They both offer confidential transfers, confidential programs, and a lot of the sort of features you'd expect in a zero knowledge privacy focused chain like Aztec. But this is all on the Solana L1 natively without the need for L2s or sharding or scaling through sort of off-chain systems. What's more, there's actually a whole new feature called confidential transfers that's launching on the Solana network in January. It's live on DevNet right now, which uses zero knowledge proofs at the system level to mask the amount of funds transferred between two users. So you could see that you and I transacted on Solana and that, maybe you sent me some USDC, but you wouldn't be able to see how much USDC was actually transferred. And so that's actually just a base level privacy primitive that is, in development for the Solana network and will be deployed in January. So there's a lot of zero knowledge stuff happening on Solana, but it's happening a lot more quietly because it's not needed for scale the same way it is on other networks.
Super exciting to hear. And let's take a deeper look into like what Solana has been doing recently. One of them has been Token 2022 program. Can you explain to your audience what is a token program in general, and more specifically for the Token 2022 program? How can we expect like developer experience, user experience can be improved by that?
Yeah, so Token 2022, that's the developer name. That sort of public name for it is Token Extensions. But this is the culmination of more than 2 years of work, really examining what do enterprises, what do businesses, and what do sort of advanced developers need in terms of token functionality. And so today on Solana, there's one main program called Token Program, greatly named by engineers. You just name the thing what the thing is. And the token program is used for everything from creating a new token to transferring a token to, NFTs on Solana are derived from that token program. And so this is the next great generation of that program. It has about 16 new extensions, which are options that developers can turn on when they're creating a token that really fit the needs of what businesses need to do things like bring stocks and equities and treasury bills and real world assets on chain. It also has a lot of functions that, folks in the NFT space and sort of the meme coin folks have been asking for a while. One of those is transfer fees. So there's one token on Solana already using token 22 called Burn. They're sort of a meme coin, but one of the tricks of the meme coin is every time you buy or sell or transfer, it automatically burns 5% of that token. And that's a really interesting example of how you can use some of these new token program features to program stuff that is sort of all contained within one program. A lot of the stuff within, the token, this new token extension program, it has been possible on Solana before or been possible on other blockchains, but it required combining 6 or 7 different projects, smart contracts together into sort of one idea. And with Token 2022 and Token Extension, developers can just do this all within one program. And so that program currently it's been on mainnet for, a few months now. It's going through audits, and we expect it to be sort of fully audited and ready for mainstream in January as well. And confidential transfers is one of those token extensions I was talking about previously. There's a whole bunch of different features on here that are, I think, really interesting for folks that are from stablecoin issuers to, folks trying to bring real world assets on chain. So there's a lot of really cool stuff involved in this next generation of the token program.
Definitely interested to see what kind of creativity the developers will utilize right through the Token 2022 program.
Yeah.
And yeah, talking about like the Solang as well, right? So Solang is a Solidity compiler for Solana. So
Yeah.
at the beginning of the AMA, I mentioned that like Solana predominantly using like Rust as like the programming language, but Solang was released July this year, and it enables developers to deploy dApps on Solana using Solidity. So what motivates the introduction of a Solidity compiler to Solana?
Yeah. So what we hear routinely from, developers is that they are looking for more scale. They're looking to build things they can't build on other networks, but what they really care about is their program logic, right? They've spent a lot of time coding in, complicated DeFi relationships between, how something works. And to rebuild all of that core contract plumbing can be a months long process. And so Solang is one of the two answers to what that is. So Solang still requires, probably a few weeks of developer work to take an Ethereum EVM contract and, turn it into something you can deploy on Solana. But what it does is it takes all that internal program logic about the relationships between different parts of your code and translates that really well. So the developer still needs to rebuild the account structure for Solana because Solana runs on a very different account structure than Ethereum does. But it solves a lot of that hard work about rebuilding the program logic internally. The other option is something called Neon. And so Neon is actually a full EVM emulator. You could think of it as an L2 for Solana if you wanted to, or a modular component scaled on top of a DA layer, if you want to think about it that way. But it's basically an entire Ethereum virtual machine that runs on top of Solana and can natively interact with other programs running on Solana. And so that project is called Neon, and that's another approach to sort of making it easier for developers. And again, these are not really built for like your average EVM developer, like who just wants to start programming on Solana. Like if you're starting from scratch, you should just, there's great developer tutorials at solana.com/developers. These are tools that are really built for folks who already have deployed successful apps on EVM chains that are looking to expand or scale that onto Solana.
Right. And let's move to talk a bit more about like the less technical stuff. So let's talk about conferences and events like you guys have this year. Recently,
Yeah.
Breakpoint 2023 took place in Amsterdam. What is the focus of Breakpoint this year?
Yeah, so Breakpoint, started almost accidentally in 2021. This was sort of this crazy idea, coming out of COVID of could we get 1,500 people to come to Lisbon and to go to a conference about Solana. The network was about a year and a half old at that point. It hadn't been on that long. But there was a ton of developer excitement and adoption. And so we had this crazy idea that we could get 1,500 people to Lisbon, and we had about 3,000 show up. And so, tickets were sold out, a month and a half in advance. It was this this whole great experience where developers got to see each other in person for the first time because they'd been largely building, at their homes during COVID. And so Breakpoint 2023 this year in Amsterdam is the third time we've done this giant community conference. And it's really meant to be a culmination of all of the work that's been done over the course of the year. So a lot of teams release news and announcements and sort of like make it a big spectacle for them. But it's also a place to get a bunch of these core developers, in the same room or in the same area and, make new friends, get new business ideas, new ideas for what to build. A lot of people get hired at Breakpoint or they switch jobs at Breakpoint. It's a really awesome time. But one of the core values of Breakpoint is that it's a developer first conference, right? It's the idea is like if we're going to ask you to fly all the way to a country and like spend money on a ticket and a hotel and everything like that, this has to be worth your time as a developer, and it needs to set you up well for what you need to know for the next year to keep developing and scaling. And so that's really the goal of Breakpoint this year. And, we announced at Breakpoint this year that Breakpoint next year for the first time is going to be in Asia. So we're doing it right after Token 2049, right before Formula One in Singapore. And I'm really excited because, Europe's a great place, but like there are certain countries that have a hard time getting a visa to Europe. And so bringing that into Asia, we hope there's a whole bunch of people who are going to be able to attend Breakpoint for the first time.
Right. And now that you mentioned like Breakpoint 2024 will make its debut in APAC region, right, in Singapore. So what have you observed in the APAC developer community that leads to this decision to say, okay, we should do one in APAC instead of like putting it in like North America and Europe?
Yeah, I mean, we've done hacker houses in India the last 2 or 3 years. Those have been incredibly successful. We had, I think, 3,000 people show up for one this year, which meant we were, I think, accidentally the largest crypto conference in India, even though it was just about Solana. I was in Vietnam earlier this year, in Saigon, meeting a ton of developers there. There's incredible things happening in Vietnam, both for game tech on blockchain and for DeFi. And Singapore is sort of a great neutral hub for blockchain and investors, and it's Western friendly. It's also very much like very visa free for people to get to. So it seemed like it was a really great place to sort of double down in this year. And we were trying to actually bring the conference last year to Asia, but just the timing didn't work out. So I think it's going to be really exciting to, have. I think we have room for up to 6,000 people this year. So it's going to be an even bigger event. And, hopefully by timelining it with Token 2049, which is already a large conference that draws its own large audience, it's going to be cheaper for people to attend as well.
Yep. Hopefully like I can be there as well next
Yeah.
year. Yeah. So let's move back a bit on like the Breakpoint 2023 this year. So as you mentioned, right, I always love about like the developer driven conferences. So what kind of innovations or like things that actually caught your attention or surprised you during the conference?
Yeah, well, the biggest one was the announcement that FireDancer is now on testnet. This is that new validator client we were talking about before. It's now on testnet, which is really huge and exciting. The other piece is there's a big focus on token extensions in Token 2022. Confidential transfers were shown on stage. And that's kind of another really big piece moving forwards for the next sort of generation of the network. But what I was really excited to see, most of the announcements are not from the Solana Foundation or from Solana Labs. They're from teams building on the network. So there was a big presentation by Jito. There's a big presentation by Jupiter. All these other teams that have been building. One of the, so all the sessions from Breakpoint are actually available on YouTube. I think we had 135 sessions this year, maybe a few more than that. So you can go and watch sort of all of them. And it's everything from conversations around what do you need to know from crypto policy perspective to stay compliant to, announcements from some large stablecoin issuers that they're, bringing Circle CCTP to Solana, from Wormhole and Pith about sort of new products they're launching. So it's just a really incredible time to see all this new tooling come to the network. So I think for me, the Breakpoint has gone from something where developers learn about the really awesome stuff that the Solana Foundation and Solana Labs and their core contributors have built to a place where they learn about the really great things that like other developers are building on top of the network as well.
Right. So to all our audience, be sure to check out the video on Breakpoint this year if you're interested. And speaking about like a less like developer driven like exhibition or events, right? You guys also did a showcase of arts on Solana during Art Basel Miami Beach recently.
Yes.
Please tell us more about that.
Yeah, so creators and NFT artists on Solana have been really gaining attention over the last 2 or 3 years, and so we had an opportunity to showcase a number of those at Art Basel in Miami this year, and that was a really successful event down there. I think one of the pieces that a lot of artists struggle with is going from selling art natively on blockchain to breaking into sort of the fine art gallery circuit, modern art movement, where quite frankly, there's just a lot of money that's very interested in digital art. And so, the goal of the Solana Foundation in doing this sort of stuff is not to promote any one artist or give one artist any sort of, special treatment here. It's really to show collectors and to show, people who acquire art that there's really interesting stuff happening on the Solana network. And so that was the goal of kind of going down to Art Basel this year and doing that. And, I was not there, but from what I hear, it was a pretty successful few days down there.
And I think it touched on like a broader topic on mass adoption, because like art obviously is one of the good way to bring in new users, right? But I think mass adoption is still not here in crypto or blockchain yet. So what do you
Yeah.
think we are lacking in the overall blockchain industry to bring on board new waves of user into Web3? And what role do you see Solana plays in this journey?
So, I think a year and a half ago, I would say we were pretty far away. I actually don't think that's the case anymore. I do think that, it looks like we're heading into a little bit of a cycle. If that's the case, I think this is going to be the one where we actually see breakout mass adoption. For years, the UX hasn't been there. And the UX is not just a function of design. I think people very often boil it down to, oh, the design isn't there, or, oh, our ideas of self custody aren't good enough. But I think really what it is for many years, blockchains have just been too slow and too expensive for mass adoption. Users expect things to be fast and snappy and free, and blockchain does not provide free, right? But what it can provide is very, very, very low cost. And so I think, this is not just a Solana story, but I think what you see is like the things that are catching on Solana, a lot of them are consumer facing applications. They're things like Drip House. They're things like Sling. They're things like Jupiter. And this is just a really different set of technology stacks than we've ever had before for sort of the mass adoption potential. I think we also see a lot of other fast networks that are providing really great user experiences as well. So, I actually I would say that I think we're closer to not necessarily mass adoption, but having a shot at mass adoption than we've ever been before as an industry. Like the advent of just even basic things like passkeys, right? Passkeys are such a better solution than seed phrases for the vast majority of users. And like that just changes the entire security model for what you have to teach people before they can start using blockchain. Like if your first onboarding experience is, okay, here are 12 words, keep them safe, don't forget them, or else all your money's gone. That's a really rough onboarding to blockchain.
Right. And apart from consumer facing application, right, I think one of the easiest ways for like users to understand is give them a hardware that is related to blockchain. And you guys just did it, right? Let's talk about
Yeah.
Solana Saga. Solana Saga, I think, is probably the first Web3 mobile phone ever created. And it is with a price tag of like $1,000. And
Yeah.
it's completely sold out last week, sorry. And can you elaborate how Saga is fitting into the overall strategy of Solana, and what are the new things coming out to Saga?
Yeah, I think if you look at trends in any sort of consumer adoption of any software technology, if mobile is not easy, the technology will never be adopted, right? This was the like you can think about pretty much any product category that existed before the iPhone, and it was not a success, right? Match.com existed far before Tinder or Bumble or any of these online dating apps, but they were not a success because it wasn't a convenient user interface on a mobile platform. And so Saga was an attempt to see if crypto was ready for mobile. And it was, a bet at the time to say, like, hey, can we actually build something that is going to be a high quality consumer experience of crypto that they can take in their pocket that's safer than a software wallet, but they don't have to carry on a hardware wallet with them. And the early the phone launched in the depths of a bear market. It was not a massive success at launch. I think they're up until like a few weeks ago, there's about 2,500 units that were sold of the initial 20,000 order. But one of the things that it came with is a whole series of crypto rewards. So there were NFTs that you had a chance of minting, and it came with what was at the time just a few dollars of a meme coin. That fast forward 9 months, actually became a dollar value that was pretty similar to the purchase price of the phone. And so there were a lot of people who were curious about the phone, but they weren't $600 curious about the phone. But when the value of that meme coin, which was Bonk, went up, I think a lot of people decided, you know what, I am willing to spend $50 to try out this phone, right? I'm curious enough about what this technology is. And so going forwards, I think the idea there to bet on mobile was very much correct. Is dedicated hardware produced by Solana Labs the right model going forwards? I think there's still a question to say, is that the thing that's actually going to be needed? or is the software stack enough? And so the team there is still thinking about what that next phase for the project is. But the folks at Solana Labs who have been working on mobile are deeply committed to making mobile work on blockchain, whether that's through dedicated hardware, software, new wallets, adoptions of passkeys. There's a lot of different ways that could happen. But yeah, the phone is now sold out in both the US and the EU. And so, it's sort of a stay tuned at this point.
Right. I think in any case, right, it is a very interesting experiment that worth us to try out, right, whether we can create like a blockchain focused mobile phone. But for those of the
Yeah.
audience, right, who are curious about like the Saga, or they just first time hearing about Saga, can they expect like a restock at some point for the Saga phone?
Nothing to share right now
Mm,
about that. What I will say though is like, if you follow tech news at all, you may have seen the Epic versus Google lawsuit that just got resolved, and that was entirely about App Store practices. And Epic won that battle. I think a lot of people did not expect that to happen. But this is really what Saga is all about. It's trying to break the duopoly of Apple and Google on App Store and app distribution, especially at times when these companies are becoming more and more hostile to crypto and blockchain. And so we think it's really important for there to be a decentralized app store where developers can distribute and not have to pay in-app transaction fees and not have to go through the Google App Store and review process for this. And so that's kind of the vision of what this all is. It's not just, it's a phone that has a secure element in it so you can store crypto safely on it. Samsung has shipped some version of that before. It's about bringing a holistic, cohesive crypto experience to the phone. And I will say, if the result of this project is that Apple and Google change their practices and allow crypto, and the phone flops because suddenly everyone can build applications directly on iOS and Android, that is success. It'd be great to sell 100 million phones someday too, but if the goal here is to change the industry, and the only way you do that is by proving demand on another platform.
right. If we can see that day, right, when like all the apps on Android and iOS are so like blockchain friendly, I think is a good thing for the whole industry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's change gear a bit, right, to talk about a very very hot topic even outside of crypto, which is AI.
Yeah.
I noticed there's an AI session when I scroll through Solana's website, and you guys have like a 10 million grant for AI on Solana. So for sure, crypto has been super hot inside and outside of crypto. But how do you see the intersection between AI and crypto, and what can we do more from here?
Yeah, so I think the intersection of AI and crypto is not as direct as I think a lot of people talk about it being. So a lot of times people are like, "Oh, you can train AI on crypto." And the answer is like, not really, right? Like at the end of the day, these are very complicated models to train that require insane access to GPUs that you can't even buy, right? I mean, like Nvidia sells like hundreds of millions of dollars of GPUs to cloud providers so they can train these models. A blockchain is not going to be the place that you train it. However, there's a whole monetization problem around AI, both around the training data and then around actual usage. So one of the things that I think is surprising is Midjourney and a bunch of the rest of the sort of pay per credit card use AI projects out there. They're one of the highest rates of fraud and default for credit cards. And so there's a whole angle of blockchain payments for facilitating AI transactions. There's a model where actually you're producing algorithms and then you're licensing them through blockchain to individuals to have the access to run them. There's models where I might be able to say, I'm going to actually voluntarily upload a copy of all of my text messages into, an FHE encrypted vault. And if an AI wants to train on that data, it's going to pay me for access to that data. And so there's a lot of different applications here for AI apart from sort of art. And there's obviously the AI and NFT application where you can have AI generated art, for NFT collections. But I think that's sort of just scratching the surface of what's possible. One of the things I'm actually really excited about is AI audits for code. I think we're still probably a few years away from smart contract auditing by AI, but you know that has massive potential to address some of the hacks we've seen and code instabilities across all networks. If we can have these things be automated. There's a group called Sec3, which is already doing automated audits for Solana programs. And so it'd be really awesome to have, guardian AIs that can be deployed on networks that actually just look for vulnerabilities and then get in touch with developers when they find them.
Right. So I'm sure like AI and crypto is an intersection where like AI is going to help crypto a lot, right? In terms of like the things that you mentioned about the security, and also just in general, like all those like AIGC like contents. And on the other hand, crypto is actually enabling AI to do like more monetization, create like economic markets that incentivize different players, right, within like the AI stakeholders. So move to the next question, right? Although we do not discuss price action in AMA, the recent rally for Solana definitely shows a shift in how the broader crypto community views Solana as a resilient ecosystem. So as a dedicated believer slash builder of the ecosystem, do you feel like all the hard work you guys put in, especially after what happened last year, are finally getting the recognition you guys deserve?
Yeah, I mean, I will say there was a moment there last year and sort of in November where I think a lot of people thought Solana might go the way of Terra and no longer exist after the collapse of FTX. And there's a few days there that were, I think scary. And like at that time, you're on the phone constantly talking with developers and, how they're feeling, what they're thinking. Uh, One of the amazing things is in the collapse and the aftermath, there's not a single technical team that decided to migrate away from Solana to build on a different network. And that was a real testament to the fact that like Solana is not just interchangeable with another blockchain. The things you can build here on the network are different than what you can build on other networks. And so, I think if you'd said in, November of 2022 that we'd be here in December of 2023 and everything would be better than ever, I don't know if a lot of people would have believed you. And so, I don't fault the people who sat the network out for the last few months. I think if you weren't a developer, if you weren't already a user of Solana, if you already didn't know what the characteristics of the network was, there's pretty much no other network besides like Ethereum and Bitcoin that probably could have gone through what Solana went through and come out the other side this strong. But this is just getting started. The technology on the network is probably 100 times better than it was in 2021. So there's kind of a whole series of really amazing things that have been happening. And one of the big things behind that is like teams built through the bear on Solana. If you haven't played around with Jupiter Aggregator yet, or if you haven't played around with Drip House or some of the applications on Solana, it's a complete revolution in UX. It feels like a Web 2 application in terms of its responsiveness and time and transaction fees and everything. So I would say you're seeing a real vision of like DeFi 2.0 on Solana, which is like it's incredibly great to see the sort of like attention this is finally getting from other folks in the ecosystem. At the same time, this is kind of what I think we always expected, was that the technology of Solana supports one of the most impressive developer communities and user bases anywhere in crypto.
Right. Having attended a few of the Solana ecosystem call myself, right, I'm definitely impressed by like the bonding within like the developer community on Solana. So I think going back
Yeah.
to the like first two questions about like OPOS, I think this is what making the developer believe in the ecosystem. Even there's like some obstacle happen right in the journey. So any upcoming announcement or key milestone that we should pay attention to?
Yeah, I mean, look for January for, the launch of token extensions on the network. I think that's going to be one of those really big enabling framework technologies for developers to build entirely new types of token experiences on chain. That's really exciting. There's a lot of improvements for the NFT crowd as well coming as part of that. So that's a really big thing I'd say to watch out for. And then, over the course of 2024, hopefully we'll see Fire Dancer on mainnet, and that'll be its own crazy thing to see as well, where we may see anywhere between 10 to 100x in performance on key metrics for the network. But that is subject to software development and audits, and still kind of a little ways out for that. But token extensions are really the big thing that's coming up from the Solana Foundation and Solana Labs for sort of those base core technologies on the network.
Right. And looking at things at a long horizon, what is the end game or ultimate goal that Solana wants to achieve?
Uh, the network today, but probably 10,000 times the capacity. So, the core vision of Solana remains the same, which is that it needs to be an incredibly fast, incredibly cheap blockchain that has parallelization built into it at the base layer that remains cheap as more and more people use the network. And so there's a number of sort of technologies that are driving forwards to make that possible. So one of them is this idea of multiple concurrent block producers, which is a major, major step forwards. That's something that developers are just starting to work on now. There's new improvements coming with runtime V2, which can also improve dramatically the performance of the network. But I think really when it comes down to it, the long-term vision of Solana is that the cost of a transaction should be as low as possible on the network. And that's a core value. Like Solana transactions are not cheap because the network just hasn't gotten valuable yet, or there's just not demand for transactions yet or something like that. It's cheap by design, and it's going to maintain a low level of cost going forwards, no matter what the price of SOL the asset is, or no matter how many people are trying to use the network, because it's fundamentally not based on transaction fees is the most important value for the network. And so that's kind of that big long-term vision, is that this is a network that can support, the execution layer for the internet. And, that is also not a chain maximalist pitch, right? If you want Bitcoin and you really believe in Bitcoin, you should buy Bitcoin on Solana because it's going to be a lot cheaper than buying Bitcoin on other networks, right? There's all these sorts of visions about how Solana can work with other networks as a really fast execution layer.
Right. Really excited to see like when we catch up, maybe like 2 years later, like what will Solana looks like at
Well,
that
I'll see you
time.
at Breakpoint, right?
Yeah. But I mean, like after 2 or 3 years, when we look back at the AMA today, right, we might be like really
Yes.
surprised about how much we've done over the past 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that wraps up all the times we have for the AMA question today. Thank you so much, Austin, for joining us today. And
Yeah.
a big thank you to like the Solana and Crypto.com community for sending in all the questions. But before we say goodbye, is there any final message you have for those who are watching?
Uh, keep your account safe. Like going into a bull market, it's always, things get crazy pretty quickly. Make sure you have two-factor turned on in your accounts. Don't get hacked. Don't click suspicious links. Like take a moment, take a breath, make sure you know what you're clicking. Don't get rugged.
Yeah, very great reminder. Be safe, everyone. And
Yes.
yep, you can find Austin on X at Austin_Federa, and you can follow Solana at Solana. Make sure to follow Crypto.com to keep up with the latest news, upcoming events, contests, and more. Follow us on X at Crypto.com and make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any future AMAs. Wish everyone a great holiday season and see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks.